June 1944, Normandy. Before the first British tanks pushed inland from the beaches, before the orchards, stone villages, and high hedgerows turned every lane into a killing ground, there was already a quieter battle taking place inside the armored columns. It was not fought with armor thickness, gun caliber, or engine power. It was fought through headsets, call signs, short orders, and disciplined wireless nets. A British tank was not simply a steel box with a gun. By the middle of the war, it had become a moving communications post, connected to its troop, its squadron, and its own crew through a wireless system that allowed commanders to think and move as a group instead of fighting as isolated machines. The center of that system was the wireless set number 19, designed for armored fighting vehicles and widely installed in British tanks, carriers, and other vehicles. Its importance was not that it was perfect. It was not. It was heavy, technically demanding, and vulnerable to the normal problems of battlefield radio. But it gave British armored crews something that many armies had struggled to achieve in the early years of the war: a practical way to keep tanks talking while moving under fire. The set included an A set for longer-range communication within the regiment or squadron, a B set for short-range communication between tanks, and an intercom channel for the crew inside the vehicle. That meant a troop leader could pass a target, a warning, or a change of direction without stopping the formation. A squadron commander could redirect his tanks before the enemy fully understood what had changed. Inside the vehicle, the commander, gunner, loader, driver, and operator were not 5 separate men trapped in noise and smoke. They were part of one controlled machine. The National Army Museum notes that the number 19 set gave around 10 miles of speech range and around 20 miles using Morse with a simple vertical antenna, which made it suitable for the mobile armored warfare Britain expected to fight. This is the part German officers could not ignore. Britain's tanks were often criticized for mechanical weakness, confusing doctrine, and uneven design. Yet British armored communication was not a small technical detail. It was a tactical weapon. And once British crews learned how to use wireless discipline properly, the radio became something more dangerous than a voice in a headset. It became the nervous system of the armored regiment. The British advantage did not come from the radio set alone. A wireless set inside a tank was only useful if the army using it had learned how to turn signals into action. By 1944, British armored units had spent years absorbing painful lessons from France, the Western Desert, Tunisia, and Italy. Early in the war, British tank formations often suffered from poor coordination, scattered attacks, and confusion between armor, artillery, and infantry. But those failures forced a change. The British Army became increasingly serious about radio procedure, fire control, and the discipline of keeping formations connected under pressure. This was where the wireless set number 19 mattered most. It gave a tank troop the ability to behave less like 4 separate vehicles and more like one fighting organism. The A set could link the tank to higher command or squadron control. The B set allowed shorter range tank-to-tank communication inside the troop. The intercom allowed the commander to direct his crew without shouting over engine noise and gunfire. Surviving technical descriptions of the set show that it was designed specifically to combine longer-range radio, short-range inter-tank communication, and crew intercom in one armored vehicle system. To a German officer watching from the other side of a field, the effect could seem strangely quick. A British tank commander saw a threat, spoke into the net, and another tank shifted position. A troop leader received a correction, and the line of advance adjusted. A squadron headquarters passed an order, and several tanks changed their fire or movement without a runner crossing open ground. It was not magic. It was procedure. It was training. It was a shared language of short commands, map references, call signs, and drilled response. The Germans had radios too, and early in the war German Armored Command was famous for exploiting wireless control inside fast-moving panzer formations. The contrast was that by 1944, British crews had learned how to make communication more consistent and harder to break. British tanks might not always be faster. They might not always have the heaviest gun. But when properly handled, they could listen, report, and redirect before confusion hardened into defeat. That is why radio tactics mattered. They turned information into movement, and movement into survival. Once that pattern appeared on the battlefield, German officers were not simply facing British tanks. They were facing British tanks that could think together. The most important British habit was not speaking constantly. It was knowing when to speak, what to say, and how little was needed. In an armored fight, a long message could be as dangerous as no message at all. Commander did not need a speech. He needed a target, a direction, a warning, or a correction. The British system, at its best, reduced confusion into short, usable signals. A troop could halt, shift fire, change formation, or report enemy movement before the entire formation had lost momentum. This mattered because British tanks rarely fought as independent dueling machines. In North Africa, Italy, and Normandy, their greatest strength appeared when armor, artillery, infantry, engineers, and reconnaissance were joined into a controlled battle. The radio linked the tanks, but it also allowed the tank commander to fit his vehicle into a wider tactical system. A squadron could be warned of anti-tank guns. Artillery could be requested or adjusted. A supporting unit could be told where the armor was moving next. The wireless set number 19 was built for armored vehicles and gave British crews a combination of longer-range communication, short-range troop communication, and internal crew communication, which made it central to this layered battlefield control. German officers understood radio warfare very well. Their early panzer victories had depended on fast-moving command, aggressive initiative, and radio-equipped formations. But by the later war, German armor was often fighting under very different conditions. Fuel was short, replacements were uneven, formations were broken up and attached to desperate defensive sectors. A tank might be tactically powerful, but if it was separated from infantry, artillery, and neighboring vehicles, it could become a local weapon instead of part of a coordinated response. The British method was less glamorous than the image of a lone tank commander making a brilliant decision through smoke and dust. It was more methodical. It depended on prepared nets, trained operators, and commanders who understood that a tank battle could be won by passing information faster than the enemy could react. The National Army Museum records the number 19 set in British Sherman use, with speech range around 10 miles and Morse range around 20 miles using a simple vertical antenna, showing how seriously the British treated mobile armored communication. That was the real contrast. Britain had not only placed radios inside tanks, it had built habits around them, and habits, repeated under fire, became tactics. A British tank troop in 1944 did not need to be perfect to be dangerous. It needed to remain connected long enough to act before the enemy could recover. That was the deeper purpose of the radio net. It gave commanders a way to control movement in small pieces. One tank covering, another moving, one troop reporting a suspected gun, another shifting to support the infantry. In the broken terrain of Normandy, where visibility could collapse to a few yards, that ability mattered as much as armor. The German officer looking at British methods would have recognized the old lesson from his own army's early victories. Speed of decision was often more important than weight of metal. But by 1944, Britain had turned radio control into something patient and systematic. Tanks were not merely charging forward. They were being fitted into a battle plan with artillery barrages, infantry advances, engineer obstacles, and anti-tank screens. In that kind of fight, a radio message did not have to be dramatic. It only had to arrive in time. This is where British practice created an uncomfortable contrast. German armored units had pioneered wireless command in the first years of the war, but later German formations were increasingly forced to fight with shortages, disrupted communications, and mixed units thrown together by emergency. British units, by contrast, could rely on a growing Allied communications and supply system. The wireless set number 19 was commonly installed in tanks, universal carriers, and wheeled vehicles, giving the British Army a widely shared communications tool across armored formations. The value was not only technical, it was psychological. A commander who could hear his troop leader, his operator, and his crew had a better chance of staying calm. A driver who received clear intercom orders did not have to guess. A gunner who heard the commander's correction could shift fire faster. A radio operator who understood the net became part of the tank's awareness, not just a man turning dials. Technical descriptions of the number 19 show that its design combined longer-range communication, a short-range troop set, and internal crew intercom, which made it more than a simple radio box. The contrast, then, was not that British tanks could talk. German tanks could talk too. The contrast was that British crews had learned to make communication ordinary, disciplined, and constant enough that the tank no longer fought alone. By the time British armor was fighting through Normandy, the radio had become one part of a much larger command habit. It helped explain why British units could recover from setbacks without always collapsing into disorder. A tank might be hit. A troop might be forced to halt. An infantry attack might be pinned down. But if the net remained alive, the situation could still be reported, understood, and answered. In modern language, it was battlefield awareness. In 1944, it was often just a tired operator, a disciplined commander, and a working wireless set inside a vibrating steel hull. The British Army in Normandy still made mistakes. Its armor doctrine was not flawless, and its tanks faced real limitations against German guns, mines, and anti-tank ambushes. But the communication system gave commanders a way to turn confusion into coordination. The Imperial War Museum's Normandy collections show British Cromwell and Sherman tanks operating in close support of infantry during operations such as Bluecoat, where armor was not acting alone but firing in support of advancing troops. That detail matters because radio control was most valuable when tanks were part of a combined battle rather than a separate armored charge. For German officers, this created a bitter irony. The German army had entered the war as the master of armored wireless warfare. Its panzer divisions had shown Europe how fast radio-linked tanks could move when command, initiative, and concentration were working together. Yet by 1944, the British had absorbed many of those lessons and adapted them into a slower, heavier, more industrial style of war. The British system was not always elegant, but it was increasingly difficult to break. Radios connected tanks to tanks. Headquarters tanks relayed orders. Artillery and infantry cooperation became more deliberate. The advance might be cautious, but it was rarely blind. The wireless set number 19 was central to that method because it was designed for armored troops and provided three linked functions: longer-range communication, short-range troop communication, and internal crew intercom. Its B set was specifically intended for short-range communication between tanks in a troop, while its intercom kept the crew functioning as one machine inside the vehicle. That was why German officers could be impressed by British tank radio tactics. They were not seeing a single clever device. They were seeing an army learning how to turn communication into control. In a war where seconds decided whether a tank fired first or burned first, that control could be as decisive as armor plate. By the end of the war, the lesson was clear. A tank's strength was not measured only by armor thickness or gun size. It was measured by how quickly its commander could understand the battlefield and pass that understanding to others. British radio tactics did not remove the danger of German anti-tank guns, mines, or Panthers, but they gave armored units a practical way to fight confusion before confusion became disaster. That is why the wireless set number 19 mattered. It was not a dramatic weapon. It sat inside the tank, surrounded by cables, switches, headsets, and men trying to hear through static and engine noise. Yet museum records show that the number 19 set was commonly installed in tanks, universal carriers, and wheeled vehicles, with a speech range of about 10 miles and Morse range of about 20 miles using a simple vertical antenna. For German officers, the surprise was not that Britain had radios. The surprise was that Britain had made radio discipline part of the battle itself. A British tank did not have to be the best tank on the field to become dangerous. It had to be connected to its crew, its troop, its squadron plan, and, when possible, the infantry and artillery moving beside it. That connection turned separate vehicles into a coordinated weapon. The gun destroyed the target, but the radio found the moment. The armor protected the crew, but the headset kept them useful. The engine moved the tank forward, but communication kept it from moving blindly. So when German officers saw British tanks reacting together, correcting movement, shifting fire, and recovering from disorder, they were seeing more than equipment. They were seeing an army that had learned that modern armored warfare was not won by steel alone. It was won by steel guided by information, If this story helped you see World War II armored warfare from a different angle, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments.